A haunted road that will drive you to insanity and terror. Or an old Chinese game that lets you contact spirits who may or may not haunt you and destroy your life. Choose one. Victims of these fates await in today's assortment of allegedly true scary stories. I hope you like them. Remember to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. I'm planning episodes on ranch stories and canid monster encounters. If you'd rather hear a different topic, let me know in the comments. Also, check out eeriecast.com for all our creepy shows. Now, let's begin. Riverdale Road, from A Bedbug. This is my first time writing this story down. Not the first time I've told it. Currently, I'm 25, turning 26 in October, in the year of our Lord, Satan, 2021, and this story happened when I was around 17 or 18, living in Louisville, Colorado, just 5 minutes outside of Boulder. However, the story takes place near Brighton, if my memory serves me correctly, on an 11-mile stretch of road, infamously known as Riverdale Road. I first found out about this road from an old kinda ex, I guess, but she took me there in the middle of November, at like 3 in the afternoon. There was a tree that was kind of an optical illusion, and a legend has it a witch who lived there in the early 1900s was tied to the tree and burned alive. And the illusion there is the scorch mark. The scorch mark kind of looks like a woman in a dress, staring at you. It's pretty spooky. So fast forward about 6 to 7 months, and 2 of my friends, who I'll call W and L, and a girl I'll call K, were deciding what to do one night, and I suggested, let's go check out Riverdale Road and go ghost hunting. My friends were pretty into it. None of them were skeptical, and for reference later, my friend L was just recently released from jail, awaiting his next trial. This will be kind of important later on in the story. So we make the 45-minute drive to Riverdale Road and stop at the gas station to get drinks. It's around 7 or 8 p.m. at this point. I was incredibly skeptic of the entirety of the legend, and being curious, I began looking up the lore and history of the area. I found out about the numerous body dumping sites on the road, as well as the numerous amounts of car crashes. Speaking of, our first stop was a large memorial sign for all the kids who died from the 70s to 90s on that road. Tied around the sign were little stuffed teddy bears. We inspected them, thought it was sweet. I noticed they were tied around the waist and had blue ribbons around their necks. We get back in the car and drive, talking smack about the witch and antagonizing the restless spirits, all the while smashing some candy and coffee drinks. We were all alternative kids, so naturally we were blasting Dead and Buried by A Day to Remember, as well as Bring Me the Horizon, Dance Gavin Dance, Slaves of Mice and Men, etc. As I said before, I was reading the lore on the area, so naturally we made a few stops along the 11-mile stretch of road, which were supposedly haunted. The first stop was Jogger's Hill. Some guy was hit by a car there and died. Now, supposedly, he haunts the area, as the driver never called in the incident. It was a hit and run. We walk up the short little pathway that reaches a smaller hill amongst like 3 or 4 buildings. It's really pretty at night, because the lights from the highway don't quite reach you, yet you can still see them, kind of like really bright stars as you look down around you. On top of the hill was a bed, an empty 24-rack case of natty lights, and a stake, like the kind you'd use on a vampire or something. We kick around there, not really doing much. My friends are flirting and talking with Kay, and I'm kind of just enjoying the weather and everything, minding my own business. After about 5 minutes of being bored, we hop back in the car and drive to the next spot on our list. That's when the air got heavy. And when I say heavy, it was like there was a really nice breeze and suddenly it was just still, oddly still. We stayed in the car with the windows down, pulled over with the headlights on, pointing at the witch. Well, by which I mean the tree I mentioned back at the beginning of the story with the scorch mark. It was really creepy like that. All of us kind of just went silent together, after having just talked and joked and laughed for the past 5 minutes straight. The positive mood just stopped. It was like the tree was staring at us, like the scorch mark wasn't a scorch mark anymore. I know people talk a lot about shadow people and ghosts, but if you ever had sunspots, it was kind of like that, except I wasn't blinking. I didn't take my eyes off of it for a solid 6 minutes before we said, let's go to the end and come back. We take the car out of park and drive up the road. I'm still looking and reading about the area. My friends are talking again in the front seat. All of a sudden, in the dead of night at like darn near 10 o'clock, a dove flies over the car. I don't know if they're nocturnal, but it was super weird to see this bright white dove fly right over the hood of the car and up into thin air. I can't remember for the life of me who said it, or if I read it, but I remember someone saying, if we see 3 white animals on this stretch of road, it means we should turn back. That's when someone else said, Josh, who's our Navajo friend, said red foxes are usually signs of good luck. I don't know how true that is, so correct me if that's wrong. Anyway, we make it to the end of the road. That's when I notice there's this car that has sickly green headlights with pitch black windows coming up behind us. It pulls out and passes us before speeding off into the night. At the time, I didn't think much of it besides sick lights. We get to the end of the road and stop back at the gas station. We grab more snacks. Kay pays for me since I was the poor kid in our friend group, and we get back to the car to head out. By then, it's 10 to 11 p.m., and we were all kind of feeling spooked, but I wasn't convinced this place was really haunted. Regardless, all in all, we were having a lot of fun. We drove back through, repeating all the same stops, but this time, things really got freaking weird. We got out and walked up to the sign, and all the teddy bears were tied around the throat, not the belly, like they were last time. And now, they appeared to be damp. That's when Kay walked up to me and whispered to me she had taken one of them last time. Weirded out, we get back in the car, but we begin to notice other really weird things all over the road. There was a big sign that said Riverdale Road, but there were 3 big gash marks down the middle of it that I swear weren't there before. There were broken trees. Well, the road and everything around it just generally looked a lot more torn apart. We make our way to Jogger's Hill. We park the car, get out, then go back on top of the hill. You remember when I said we were listening to Dead and Buried by ADTR? Well, we started chanting the chorus, but instead of buried, we were chanting jogging. Pretty funny stuff. As we're starting to have a good time again, I turned around and I looked towards the car. I was shocked to see some guy in our back seat. The silhouette of a man's head, shoulders, and face, but no discerning features, right there. I stepped closer, and I'm just thinking, what is that? Who is that? My friends turned to look, but that's when W and L bolt back to the car. I waited for K, and we bolted too. L gets in the back seat with me, K and W are in the front seat, and I get this wild idea to fog up the windows. So we roll up the windows and begin to breathe on the side of them. W begins to drive the car, and L is looking at my window as we back out. We were startled to find 4 streaks across mine and his windows, separate and parallel to each other, like fingertips rubbing down the glass. Immediately, I got chills, and my heart began to pound. I laugh when I'm scared, so naturally I was beginning to laugh. So we make it to the witch tree again. The air is still, and it's warm as we all pile out of the car. We parked close to the tree so that we didn't have to run far in case some wild crap went down. As we're walking, another car with green headlights comes up at about 60 to 70 miles per hour and nearly hits W. He just screams something at the car, but it was long out of sight by then. Shaken, we walk up to the trees. Every time any of us tries to speak or yell, the trees begin to move really loudly, like a gust of wind would just shake the heck out of them. W turns to me to say something, but just says, "Yeah, I'm going back to the car." Hip to hip, W and K take off back to the car, leaving just L and I. The two of us debated about continuing on to go and talk to the scorched tree. But we were genuinely scared. But my friend had a trial coming up, and I had an idea. We both decided to try to beg for the witch's blessing or something like that. Keep in mind, I was young and dumb, and I was worried about my friend. As we talked to the tree, I don't remember feeling too great about it, and I do remember wanting to run right then and there. It wasn't too encouraging that the 6'2" soon-to-be convict next to me was holding on to me for dear life. He was scared too. Then the trees began to shake loudly, and it was like the creek just behind the trees began to get louder, as if something was rising out of the water. And that's when we heard it, this laugh. A woman's laugh. It sounded like it was mocking us. The two of us ran for the car, getting in and freaking out. On the drive to the end of the road, W starts telling me why he left. He said, "I went to turn to you and L, but I saw these figures sitting in the tree, staring at you two. So I tried my best to ignore them and leave." On the way back, right before the gas station, we were all laughing and joking again, and I turned to my right. Kay and I see a white fox jumping out of the bushes, then disappearing. We kind of just gasped. Trust me, I'm the last person to ever gasp at anything. Things rarely surprise me, but that was straight up out of a horror film. We get back to the gas station. I get one more coffee. Then we stop at Walmart for a small break to walk around in a safe place. But we get back in the car for one last run. W and L in the front seat, K and I in the back. W drives up the road, and we don't really stop. At this point, we're just attempting the road to kill us, though. All of us were pretty depressed back then, and kind of wanted to try our luck. You know, like tempting fate and all that. But we decided, screw it. What do any of us have to lose? So we didn't stop. That's when we see her, 10 feet tall, towering over us, this burned wedding dress flowing in the wind, almost pitch black, just watching us on the side of the road. Before we get a chance to react, our entire lane, just our lane, is hit with this cloud of black fog. We can't even see anything out of the front or back windows, but W is smart enough not to keep driving, and I'm glad he didn't, because at the end of the road is this big curve that drops off onto another highway. We were about 15 feet from flying right over it if he hadn't reacted quick enough. When the fog cleared, we took off out of there. On our way back, we were in between total silence and freaking out. Kay lay in my lap, shocked as I was, before she looks up out of her window, and both of us see her. The witch. I swear I saw her waving goodbye to us in that burned wedding dress. That's my first and one of my most terrifying stories. I've tried rationalizing it in so many ways, but I just can't. We weren't drunk or high, but even still, somehow I had one of the best times of my life that night. We stayed out and drove until 8 a.m. I found a bottle of Evan Williams and I got drunk off of it by myself. I remember later on, after Kay and I started going out, she tossed that old bear she had taken from the sign into the old apartment Elle and I lived at. She simply tossed it in the living room and it vanished. Completely. We never found it, even when we moved everything out. Old Plantation Basement. From Medix. This event takes place in 2018. I work as a teacher. I enjoy my job despite the occasional dramas and trouble kids may cause. They're young and they need a chance to grow. The building my school occupies is an old sugarcane plantation. It had multiple changes done to accommodate the uses of a school, but the skeleton of the building remained the same, along with a few items that the custodian refuses to simply throw away. One of these items is an old tombstone. Of course, a tombstone is just carved and cut rock to mark a grave. However, the concept of the building resting on a disturbed grave would not be improbable, especially when it comes to the place I live. Because of the building's small size, the school has had to make storage where we could. One specific place is the basement. The basement apparently is where the tombstone was stored. I never went out of my way to find it since I would only go to the basement to collect books for my class. Each time I went to that basement, I would always feel watched to some degree. The old lights never quite reached the corners of the room, and the placement of bookshelves didn't do much to help the dim light either. I'm a paranoid person, I can admit that. I always chalked up my negative feelings as just that, though. Paranoia. This old building has two prominent sections inside. The front has an open roof above a courtyard that houses a koi pond and garden. It's surrounded by a short stone wall to keep the students from walking in it freely. The next section is the roofed foyer of the building. For security, the original building has large glass sliding doors to block the corridors into it. When I say these doors are heavy, I mean that even our full-grown male teachers need to use their full body weight to pull them open or closed. One of these sliding doors rests right next to the basement door. Back before the quarantine hit, the school hosted an open house for new families to check out the campus and possibly enroll. These events often took place in the afternoon until at least 8 p.m. I, along with another coworker, were a part of the administrative staff. That meant that we had keys to the whole building, while other teachers did not. This also meant that during events like these, we were tasked with locking up the building, since the custodian wouldn't be present. As bad luck would have it, my coworker's child was feeling sick and had to be taken home. As a result, I was left alone to lock up the building myself. As the motion lights of the campus would turn on as I went around locking up, I noticed the foyer lights would turn on now and then. There were motion lights in there as well to help the security cameras pick up any activity, as we couldn't afford anything fancier. This would have freaked me out, but I knew that the school had the inevitable rat that made its home in the old ceilings and would find some way to get into all sorts of locations in the building. I had started making my way over to the foyer to shut off the lights and close the sliding doors when I heard rattling. I was just in front of one of the security doors when I saw the basement door shaking, as if someone was pulling at the knob. I jumped at this and began to quickly back up, keeping my eyes on that door. I was content with leaving right then, right there, but seeing the large glass door slide across that corridor sent a primal fear shooting through my body in seconds. How did that happen? How does a heavy door that takes a full-grown man and his body weight to open or close shut on its own? I ran out of the building. No matter how fast I was moving, my mind told me with every passing second that I wasn't going fast enough, and that whatever was there was probably right on my heels. I slammed the front door shut and locked it. I sprinted through the front field of the school to my car, my painful shoes and formal appearance be darned. I got into my car and, despite the distance, I still felt as if I was being chased. The sensation of panic finally began to fade away when I turned off the road the school rested on. I went home, and I could not stop shaking. Every noise and dark hall made me want to run and hide. I was home, was the only thought that would bring me clarity. I was safe at home, and nothing could get to me while I was there. I prayed for my own sound of mind that night. I still work at that school to this day, and I haven't had any similar events happen since then. However, one of my close friends now works there with me. She's a Christian, and is never one to joke about certain aspects of spirituality. When I would ask her, she would tell me that she does feel something within the school. She can never explain it, but I think I have a hunch as to what she's feeling. I never told her about my encounter. Stuff like that terrifies her, due to her own experiences. All I know is that I refuse to be on that campus on late nights, and I absolutely refuse to be alone to lock up, even during the day. Chinese Spirit Game, from J. Ion. One of my family friends married a man who is very unapologetically agnostic and is an unabashed man of science. Despite coming from a very traditional Chinese household, her husband was very communist in his ideals. Tradition, superstitions, and folklore were unnecessary and opulent fancies. So it came as a surprise to me when one day my family friend said that her husband has had a supernatural encounter, and an almost fatal one at that. She said that when he was much younger, a silly 20-something with a ton of false bravado and too big of an ego accepted his friend's invite to join them for a game of spirit summoning in a Chinese cemetery at midnight. He, being a non-believer in the supernatural, thought that if anything were to happen, whatever it was must be his friends pulling tricks to try to scare each other. Equipped with many bottles of liquor and a crudely made spirit board with hand-drawn strokes of Chinese letters and numbers, and a random coin, in addition to a handful of candles and some small straw mats to sit on, they drove to the oldest cemetery in their province just before midnight to play this game. They found a small clearing in the middle of the cemetery, where they set up their handmade spirit board on a stone slab, lit their candles, and tried to get comfortable while dousing themselves with liquid courage. When midnight arrived, they placed their fingers on the coin in the middle of the board, and one of his friends loudly declared an invitation for any spirit to communicate with them through the coin and board. They waited for about 5 minutes, but the coin did not budge. My family friend's husband then took his finger off to get a swig of alcohol, then told his friends that this was never going to work because spiritual hocus pocus is just nonsense. This is when a soft breeze blew in their direction and the candlelight flickered and dimmed down. The friend who made the declaration of invitation to spirits told everyone to get their fingers back on the coin, then asked loudly if there was any spirit there with them. The coin moved to the Chinese word for yes, and everyone got excited, except for my family friend's husband, who thought his friends were just messing around. They then took turns asking questions, and the coin's movements on the board indicated that it was a lone female spirit. One of his friends asked if the spirit would give them a winning lottery combination, and the spirit indicated yes. The spirit then gave out a series of numbers which they took note of, except my family friend's husband, who still refused to believe that they were communicating with a real spirit. Before anyone could ask another question, the coin moved to indicate the word marriage. Thinking that the spirit was prophesizing that one of them will be getting married soon, all of them burst out into laughter. Since they were working-class young men who led semi-nomadic lives as contracted laborers, none of them were in stable relationships, nor prepared to settle down, and one of his friends told the spirit this. The coin then moved to indicate the word me, and they were understandably perplexed. A living human marrying a ghost. The concept is not unheard of, but it is a rare and unusual practice that is only done as a last resort for desperate families. One of them told the spirit bluntly, "No, bye," and proceeded to pick up the coin to put in his shirt pocket, then folded the spirit board in half, effectively ending their communication by force. He then grabbed a candle to burn the board, then left it as a small pile of black ash on the stone slab as all of them made their way out of the cemetery and went home. A few days later, everyone in the group won the lottery. Nothing massive. Each of them got the equivalent of around $10,000 after the prize money was split up among them. Once again, except my family friend's husband, who refused to accept the existence of any spirit nor participate in gambling. 1 week after the encounter with the spirit in the cemetery, the friend who spoke first to the spirit complained of very vivid nightmares in which he was visited by a young woman with pale skin, long black hair, dressed in a red tunic. She demanded that he marry her as she gave him good fortune, yet he gave her nothing in return. He would firmly refuse every time, and she would proceed to strangle him, causing him to wake up in shock and cold sweat. My family friend's husband did not think this was a spiritual disturbance, but more likely a kind of psychological disorder. Yet, less than a week later, this friend was admitted to a mental asylum because of serious hallucinations and paranoia that resulted in aggression towards people. The second friend in the group visited by the female ghost was the one who folded then burned the spirit board. He started having nightmares too, of a very angry and violent woman in red who tried to slash him. When he was awake, he would uncontrollably bang his head against the wall as hard as possible over and over again, like a possessed man. Just 2 days after those nightmares started, he hung himself without leaving behind an explanation. The last 2 members of the group, my family friend's husband and another man, started to get unnerved by what was happening. With 2 friends experiencing bizarre happenings back to back, they did not want to wait until the situation became dire, so the surviving friend, being more of a believer in spirits and divine intervention, went to a well-known Taoist temple to seek help for them both. The medium at the temple, who channeled the Empress Dowager of the Taoist pantheon of gods, took them in as her disciples in order to cast a blanket of protection over them, while she sought out the female ghost in question to negotiate a truce. Turns out this was no ordinary female ghost. The female ghost used to be a young woman who passed away from a disease before having the chance to marry, more than 50 years ago. Since her desire to marry was never fulfilled, she was very scornful, which contributed to her powers over the decades. In Mandarin, this is known as Li Gui, which literally translates to fierce ghost or malicious ghost, who have much greater abilities than the typical ghost, such as controlling local weather and destroying entire towns. The female ghost was extremely offended by the rude behavior of the group, particularly the first 2 guys who were possessed, because they did not give her any offering when she was summoned. They also cut her off curtly when the topic of marriage was broached, despite her giving them the winning lottery combination, which they didn't even thank her for. The Empress Dowager, through the medium, instructed the 2 surviving men to apologize to the female ghost, provide prayers and offerings, and to abstain from vices and meat and confrontations for a whole month. The friend with a share of the lottery winnings was told to relinquish all his prize money by giving it away to a charity as atonement, which he promptly did. And as part of the truce with the ghost, these 2 men have to return to the temple at least once a year for 10 days to take part in prayers and ceremonies. My family friend's husband is still largely agnostic and very communist in his approach to religion and spirituality. However, he still obeys the orders of the temple medium, even 30 years later, because he refuses to take chances with things he could not see nor explain, and perhaps it's a way for him to deal with the trauma of losing two of his closest friends. Considering he and his remaining friend went on to have very successful careers and got married and had children, and never encountered any spiritual disturbance after that, the arrangement they have so far seems to be working well for them. Suffice to say, his children and his friends' children were never exposed to anything supernatural, so that they'd never develop the curiosity to try these things out. River of Blood from NearTheBanks. When I was 20, back in 2018, I went on a backroad camping trip with some friends. There were 5 of us in the group, all buddies from high school. Ryan, Sam, she's like a sister to us, Damien, Roger, and myself. You can call me Cam. We'd been on many camping trips before, but this one was very sporadic on account of our schedules finally lining up. So all of us figured, let's go on a weekend trip. And that's what we did. We wanted to stay close to home so that not much traveling would be involved, so we ventured into a local forest and set up camp right beside a river. Having our 2 large tents put up, with a couple of hammocks and camping chairs around our freshly made fire, we were enjoying roasting hot dogs over the fire when we heard a faint clicking from across the river in the bushes. Damien was very adamant, saying it was some type of beetle, so we opted to ignore this clicking. Before long, it was dark. Most everyone retired to the tents except me and Sam, because we liked to sleep in the hammocks under the stars. Sam goes off to change in the woods, and about 40 seconds later, I hear her call, "Very funny, who took my clothes?" She comes walking out of the woods in the sweatpants and shirt she changed into to sleep. The other guys pop their heads out of the tents and look at her. "What do you mean?" I ask. "Well, they didn't walk off on their own. One minute they're on the rock and next they're gone." Sam is visibly upset by this. Us guys look at each other confused. "We really didn't. We wouldn't do that to you. Maybe an animal took off with them," Roger suggested, and Sam huffed. "Well, that's just perfect," she said sarcastically and walked over to the hammock. The guys mutter to themselves and go back into the tents. I head over to my hammock and settle into it, looking up at the sky. Unfortunately, there were no stars on account of it being overcast. It was nice and warm though, no need for anything but sweatpants and a t-shirt, and a pillow. I relaxed into some sleep after a light chat with Sam about looking for her clothes tomorrow, and joking about a bear wearing her blue jeans. I don't know what time it was, but it was very late when I woke up. Looking around, I tried to see what had caused me to gain awareness because we had stayed up so late. I expected to wake up around 11 a.m., not while it was still dark. Blinking the cobwebs from my eyes, I swung my legs out of the hammock, and I sat there for a minute, just staring into the darkness of the woods across the river. I thought I could see something floating down the center of it, and curious, I grabbed a flashlight from my rucksack and went over to check it out. I shined the light at the bobbing object in the water. I could see red in the water, and what appeared to be a person face down. I held back a curse, stepping forward for a better look, and the person in the river seemed to resemble Sam. She must have went to the woods to relieve herself and fallen in. That was my immediate thought. I screamed out for help while jumping into the water with my flashlight still in hand, so I could still see her. The current was faster than I expected, and the river deeper than I thought. These slippery rocks made me crash through the water violently, but I managed to reach her and drag her towards the opposite bank, as it was closer than the one I'd come from. I yanked her from the water and to the shore. I started clearing her hair from her face, searching for her breath and any wounds she might have. I felt a faint breath coming from in and out her nose as I heard the rest of my friends arrive on the other side of the river. They were half asleep, shining flashlights at me, blinding me in the process. "Cam, Who is that?" Ryan shouted at me, starting to walk into the river himself, while the others kept blinding me with their flashlights. "I think Sam fell into the river and bumped her head," I yelled back. "What do you mean? I'm right here." I hear Sam's voice from across the river, and my blood ran cold. She turned the flashlight to show herself. Then who?" I stuttered, looking down at the thing in my arms that looked to be Sam's twin, wearing the clothes that Sam was wearing from earlier today, but not the sweatpants and t-shirt she had changed into to sleep. It had taken her clothes. A clicking noise emanated from its mouth like a laugh, and it opened its eyes. Those eyes looked so bloodshot that they were almost black, like congealed blood had gathered around the iris. This Sam, it was too pale. I tried to scramble away from it, but it grabbed my arm, squeezing its grimy fingernails into my skin as it rolled onto all fours. It began to pull me. I fell onto my back and screamed. I'm not ashamed to say I think I soiled myself, but I'm not sure, because I was soaked from the river already. It had me at the tree line in seconds, when I noticed my friends had all rushed across the river, yelling obscenities at the thing. Ryan got to me first because he was already making his way to me before. He grabbed my legs. Then Damien, Roger, and Sam seconds later were also pulling at my legs. I was crying at this point from the pain. Ryan let go of me when he was sure that the others had a wet but strong hold of me. He pulled out a pocket knife from his track pads, flipping it open and jamming it into the thing's forearm. It lets out this shrieking, clicking cry. Then it lets go of me and begins to skitter away into the darkness on all fours. I felt like I was going to black out. My arm was covered in blood. My friends hauled me up and dragged me back into the water. Roger put pressure on my arm. They all yelled to each other to get across the river and to the car and truck on the other side. We abandoned everything, even our phones and Damien's expensive camera in the tents. We drove straight to the hospital. We told the police what happened there, but they tried to reassure us it was just a crazy homeless woman who attacked us. But we know better. They offered to accompany us back to retrieve our stuff because they don't know where we camped on account of it being off the beaten track, but we refused. We never went back to that place, nor have we been camping since then. The scars on my arm are a deathly reminder of how I narrowly died, and I was only saved thanks to my friends. We all moved away from our hometown last year except for Ryan. He has too many family ties keeping him there. I hope one day I stop seeing that thing in my dreams, taking the shape of my friends. Each nightmare is a different friend, trying to lure me into the woods. And hopefully, I can stop flinching when I hear the click of a pin or anything that remotely sounds like that noise that emanated from its mouth. The Brightening Dimmer Light Entity, from Frankie G. I'm 33 years old, and I've always had a lot of intention on wanting to experience the realm of the paranormal since I was a little kid. And when I say little, I mean literally tiny little, like below the age of 10. I was always into ghost stories as a kid, and I've had some strange experiences. Plus, I've always had a fascination with UFOs. My mother and I would always watch TV documentaries on the Discovery Channel and the like. Back then, I was always looking in the sky, hoping to see one during the day or night. I still do that to this day. I swear some people think I'm crazy. As a child, I searched the sky for many days, nights, and weeks and years, but I never saw one. Not until I turned 12 years old. My first UFO experience wasn't too special. The first one I saw appeared as a shooting star in the night, but then stopped mid-air. It stopped for maybe just about 3 seconds. After that, it zoomed back to the direction it came from, just as fast as it arrived. That's it. Nothing else for that one. The whole experience probably only lasted 5 to 6 seconds. I remember it like it was yesterday, and in my heart I knew it wasn't a shooting star. I remember distinctively that it made me smile, because I'd been wanting to see one for many years before that, and I finally got to see it in person. People become conditioned to TV or YouTube entertainment because of scary music and crappy zoom-ins on unidentified objects captured in the sky that they think when they see a UFO in real life it's going to be some big spectacular moment. But the truth of the matter is it's usually really quiet, and most of the times it's quick. It can be jaw-dropping depending on how intense the sighting is, but it's usually very quiet as you just stare and wonder, thinking about what the heck it is. Well, since my first sighting at the age of 12, I've had many more experiences, some of which I've captured on video. They're pretty good ones too, which can be found on YouTube. Just search for a YouTube channel called Hamilton Sky Orbs, link in the description. But most of my experiences I wasn't lucky enough to capture. I've had so many people think I'm fabricating them, and the most common thing people ask me is, "Frank, how come you see them and I don't?" And my answer is always, how often do you look at the sky? And when you look at it, how long do you stare at it before looking back down? After all, if you never cast your fishing rod, you'll never catch a fish. Same thing with seeing strange objects in the sky. If you never look, you'll never see them. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is much more intense than my first sighting at the age of 12, and I also had 2 witnesses, which was my 7-year-old daughter at the time and my cousin. This happened in 2011 on King Street West in Hagersville, Ontario, in my cousin's backyard. Hagersville is a small town in the district of Haldimand County. It was July 4th, 3 days after Canada Day. I was on the back porch with my cousin and daughter while we smoked a cigarette, and I was telling my cousin about an experience I had in Brantford, Ontario, which is a small city not too far from Hagersville. I was actually on a date with a beautiful native woman named Tony. I told my cousin as Tony and I were watching the fireworks, I saw a stationary bright orange orb while the fireworks were going off. I don't remember exactly how long, but it remained stationary for many minutes, possibly 10 to 15 minutes. Once the fireworks were done, it started to move, and it flew very slowly across the night sky as it slowed and disappeared over the horizon. Tony and other people who saw it suggested it was a drone. Drones were a new thing back then and not many people had them, but I kept it in mind as a possibility of a reasonable explanation for it. As I told my cousin this story while we were smoking a cigarette, he shouts, "Holy crap, I see one right now." I reply, "Yeah, right. Where?" He pointed to it. I couldn't see it at first, so I asked again, "Where, man? I don't see it." He tells me it's very dim, but it is there and it's moving. So I decided to put my eyes at his shoulder, following his arm and finger to try and see if I can find it. Thankfully, I do see it. It really is right there, moving slowly. I couldn't tell how high it was, but if I were to guess, it was pretty high up there, higher than commercial airplanes can fly. But like I said, I'm not sure. As I've seen so many UFOs in my life, and I'm in a little town kind of out in the middle of nowhere, I decided to do something I've never done before. I began to yell at the object in the sky like a weirdo. I started to jump up and down, waving my arms and hands, yelling, "Hey up there! Look down here! Come down here!" As soon as I stopped yelling, the object got extremely bright. I mean, it was crazy. I'd say the tiny dim object got so bright, the object grew in size, maybe half as big as the moon, no joke. My 7-year-old daughter started crying frantically because it scared her. Both my cousin and I were in awe and could not believe what we were seeing. While this thing is getting brighter and brighter, it's still moving through the sky. Then it started to dim back out. The size of it began to shrink, becoming almost as dim as it was before. It kept traveling until it got out of our sight. It was not a meteor or a shooting star. This thing moved far slower than a meteor would, and it did not burn out and did not disappear. It just got dimmer, but it was still there, barely bright, but bright enough to still see it with the naked eye. As it got out of our sight, I told my daughter to calm down. I explained to her that she was very lucky to experience this, and I told her there are people my age who never get to see things like this their entire lives. I told her there's nothing to be afraid of. She said she thought it was coming down to them. I looked at my cousin and said, "What the heck just happened? Did that thing really just respond to me yelling at it?" My cousin was lost for words. We both were just flabbergasted. I remember feeling peace and happiness in my heart. I felt special because I know this experience will forever be embedded in my memory, and I felt extremely happy that I got to experience this with my daughter and my cousin. My daughter is now 17 years old, and she still remembers that experience like yesterday. In the upcoming months and years, I told this story to many people, and no one else has ever experienced what I experienced, until the day I spoke to my friend Johnny, who moved up north in Ontario. The further up north you go in Ontario, the less light pollution there is in the sky. Johnny says he can see the Milky Way in his backyard, and the planets and stars are extremely bright. He told me one time he saw a dim object moving through the sky. He shined his laser towards it. Apparently, it was an illegal, heavy-duty laser. He told me after he pointed at the dim object, it got extremely bright, dimmed out, and repeated. It was similar to my experience, but mine only got bright and dimmed out once, while his did that multiple times. After that moment, we both dubbed the term brightening dimmer light entity. I went on to research binge on the internet, trying to see if anyone had captured this brightening dimmer light entity, since now I had confirmation from someone else who had seen similar events in the sky. After searching for many hours, I was successful at finding footage of people who caught the exact same phenomenon. I eventually stumbled upon a group called the ECETI Ranch with James Gilliland. That's ECETI, which stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Out of their many videos, which I must say are very profound, intriguing, and compelling, I finally found one video where they captured the same thing my cousin, daughter, and I saw in Hagersville many years ago. A dim object that brightened and dimmed as it traveled. It was amazing. I wonder what these objects are. I speculate they're not technological anti-gravity vehicles, but perhaps some terrestrial energy. Maybe spirit manifestations in the sky. I'm not sure. What do you think it is? Pay attention to your surroundings. From Jace Vito 100. I'd been running errands all day with my 16-year-old daughter, and I was finally headed home. Starving, I decided to grab something to eat before getting home. I live in an area that during the evening there are taco vendors everywhere, so I pulled over to the first one I saw. The street I'm on doesn't have parking on the street, so I parked in the driveway of the store the vendor is selling in front of. I figured this shouldn't be an issue, since it's late and they're closed anyway. My daughter, Brittany, is highly annoyed because she just wants to get home and insists on staying in the car. I was reluctant at first, but I told myself I'd be right back. It's gonna be real quick, since there's only one person in line. I've made it a habit of telling any of my kids that insist on staying in the car to lock the doors as soon as I get out. The moment I start to remind Brittany, she annoyingly says, I know, I'll lock the doors." Then she rolls her eyes. And as always, I make sure to hear it lock before I leave. I'll admit I'm always so busy in thinking about what things need to be done, I tend to be in my own world and not pay attention to my surroundings. But after this night, I'll never let that happen again. The person I saw online was still ordering. I was tired from my day's activity, hungry, and annoyed that this person was taking so long. At this point, a gentleman gets in line behind me, and I'm deciding on what to get. As I'm looking over the menu, a white van pulls up next to me and the gentleman behind me. It's an older man in the driver's seat, and I know I saw a passenger in the other seat, but I didn't take the time to really look at him. The driver says to the man behind me, "Is that your car in the driveway?" The man says no, and I'm waiting for him to ask me, but then he just drives away. My first thought was, oh boy, it's the owner of the business and they were upset I was parked in the driveway. But I found it odd that he didn't ask me, just the man behind me. The person in front of me by now has ordered, and they were waiting on me, but now all my attention was on this white van and why they were acting so suspicious. I asked the man behind me, "Did they ask you about that car?" I pointed at my car and I can see my daughter sitting there on her phone. I just wanted to make sure I heard it correctly. He replies yes and proceeded to ask if it was mine. I said yeah, to which he replied, "Is that your daughter in there?" I said yes. He stated, "I'd be careful if I were you." Everything about this was just off, and alarms in my head said get out of there now. I didn't order anything and I went back to my car, locking the doors behind me. As I get in, Brittany was surprised that I hadn't taken very long. Then she saw I didn't have any food. Then I simply said, it was taking too long. I didn't want to frighten her and technically nothing really happened yet. Besides, my kids already think I overanalyze everything. I could already hear her saying, "Mom, you're just being paranoid like always." As I'm pulling out of the driveway, I see that the van is coming back, and I say to myself they must own the business, and they're just waiting for me to move on out of there. Being unsettled by everything, I looked in the rearview mirror to make sure that was truly the case, and to my horror, I see the van do a U-turn and come directly behind me. At this point, I still don't say anything to Brittany, because I really didn't want to scare her. I look down to grab my phone and have it in my hand to make sure I was ready to call 911. As I look back in my rear view, the van now has its high beams on, making it so I wasn't able to see them. At this point, the alarms in my head are blaring and my stomach is in knots. 2 blocks down now and the van is still behind us. I calmly tell Brittany, "I don't want to scare you, but I think that van is following us. I don't want to get into details, but it has been since the taco stand." Of course, I got the response I knew she'd say. "Oh, Mom, you're just being paranoid. It's probably a coincidence." Immediately, she looks back. I scream for her to turn around. I didn't want them to know we were onto them, because I decided that I was going to make a quick right at the next light, and I wasn't going to stop. I speed up so I can make the right suddenly, and they wouldn't see it coming. As soon as I did, Brittany screamed in horror. "Oh my God, Mom, they turned as fast as you did." I glance at her and instantly I see fear in her eyes. At this point, my mom instinct kicks in, and calmly I say it's going to be okay, and I try to soothe her. My heart's going so fast, and honestly I'm ready to cry, but I know these men are up to no good, and I need to do something fast. As soon as I made the right, I started to speed. They must have known we were onto them, and they sped right up behind us. Brittany's looking back, and at this point, she's crying, saying over and over, "Mom, they're right behind us." My adrenaline was racing as I tried to think of what to do next. I was now in an area I was not familiar with, and I had no idea exactly where we were, and I know I should have been calling 911, but all I could think of was I needed to do something now. I made a quick turn again, speeding so fast that I was a little ahead of them, and we ended up in a residential area. As I looked to my left, I saw a man on his porch smoking, talking on his phone. I drove into his driveway. The man on the porch looked at us and had a confused look on his face. I tell my daughter to duck, and I'm still shaking and too afraid to get out of the car. I slightly open my window and yell to the man, "This van is following us, please call 911. He must have heard the fear in my voice, because he immediately looked around in fear also and called 911 for us. Too panicked to look around and see if the van was there, I reached out to Brittany, who's now sobbing, and I just embrace her. We sat in my car, not even getting out to talk to the man on his porch, and I really appreciate him for being respectful by giving us our space, because he saw we were clearly shaken up, but he stayed outside the whole time to make sure we were safe. The police arrived and took our statements, and, still terrified, we drove home. When we got home, my brother was outside, and he could tell just from the look on my face something was wrong, and as soon as Brittany walked in, I broke down crying in his arms. I had heard stories of child trafficking occurring around us, and the realization that they were obviously a part of this, the realization of what could have happened, it made me break down even more. Still, to this day, I cry thinking about it. I also think the man that was in line behind me. Had he not said what he said to set off the alarms, I would have been oblivious to the men and their intentions. Please, everyone, stay vigilant of your surroundings, because you can think this couldn't happen to you, but you'd be in for a rude awakening.